So thank you for joining us for this panel on East Coast versus West Coast code. It sounds like a softball game, but I promise you it isn't. And it's not as if each person on the panel has somehow had to choose or be given an allegiance, but it rather is a riff on something that Larry Lessig observed in his book Code and Other Laws of Cyberspace now well over 10 years ago, in which he posited, in a somewhat American-centric metaphorical way, that there were two, at least, kinds of ways of influencing people's behavior. There was East Coast code, namely the kind of code that the United States Congress and its little siblings and nephews in the states might pass. Regulation, if you do this, you go to jail. That's East Coast code. And then there was West Coast code, which was stuff that came from the minds of programmers, often directed by others. And that's the kind of code he made the claim that is just as powerful as that of the East, sometimes even more insidious, because when you see a password prompt, you can't engage in civil disobedience and just go past it anyway, unless you're a hacker. And this was something he said the world should take note of, including regulators. If you want to change behavior, he says, it's not just the East, it's the West we should look to. So we thought that might be an interesting dichotomy to explore with this kaleidoscopic set of luminaries to think about it. And in particular, in the intervening 10 years, we've seen ways in which one coast can take the other by surprise. So for instance, nobody gave Congress a heads up that Napster was about to happen. It's just sort of, Sean Fanning, and if you watch the Facebook movie, apparently that other guy, were really into, that's another form of West Coast code, but that's Southern West Coast code, which I don't know if we'll talk about. But Sean Fanning, just some guy, some kid, has this idea on like Monday, and by Thursday, the music industry is like clocked from behind, doesn't know what hit it. That's an example of the East getting surprised by the West. And I suppose, too, there are examples of the West getting surprised by the East. SOPA, whether you like it or not, almost sort of sailed through the Congress by many accounts last fall, and then suddenly, the sleeping giant of the tech world was awakened, and protest banners were made, and the East Coast quaked. So ironic, given the coastal transposition. So let me just start by asking David Hornick, venture capitalist extraordinaire. His business card says Sand Hill Road, which to me, like, the most significant thing is there's a Safeway there that's never very crowded. But apparently there's other stuff that goes on Sand Hill Road. And so, David, let me just ask you, you get a zillion pitches per second. And how often, when you're seeing a pitch, you're like, that is an amazing idea, but it would anger the East. I am worried about regulatory stuff, pass.
All the time. I mean, actually, it's very simple. If it in any meaningful way engages the East, it's over, right? There's no, that's just, there's no point in poking a giant in the eye when there's so many other giants to go chase after, right? So
an odd metaphor, but I'll take it. You're sort of Odysseus who's very discriminating about his Cyclops. But so give us an example. It can be from 10 years ago. A great idea that was clearly going to make $1 gazillion, but get sued out of existence.
No, I think that, how about every music company that's happened in the last decade? I mean, every time, I have a degree in music, so people say, oh, a VC who likes music, I should pitch him on my music startups, which seems rational. But they forgot the part where I also have a degree in intellectual property law, right? And so it's like this tension. And so I'm often pitched on these businesses, and I'll say, well, that's sort of interesting, but it does push up against certain laws that may be troubling. And they say, yes, but we have a white paper. We have a white paper from our attorney that says that this is fine. And I say, okay, I'm out. They go, what do you mean you're out? We have a white paper.
So Lucas wants to ask you a question. Lucas Bewald, founder of Crowdflower, which runs on top of services like Mechanical Turk and employs thousands of people, employ is such a terrible word, here I'm going all lawyer on you, has as independent contractors at arm's length, just for the record, thousands of people, some of whom are 4 years old, some of whom are not having all their marbles, some of whom are working far more than the law should say. Lucas has a question for you.
Didn't you guys invest in the lending club? Is that?
Sorry, bring up Lucas.
What about the lending club? I'm just curious.
We did not invest in Lending Club, but happy.
Wait, what is London Club?
Lending Club, peer-to-peer lending.
Lending Club, peer-to-peer lending, because...
So, but I take it your point is, gee, there are lots of things that are regulated, and there are lots of opportunities to disintermediate regulated businesses, and there are plenty of them make good sense, right? If you look at Uber, every single venture capitalist that met with Uber had a conversation. At the time, it was called Uber Cab, and the conversation was something like this: "Won't that piss off the cabbies?" And they said, "Well, it's okay, it's all good, right?" And those who invested in the company said, "It's different, and there'll be opportunities to get around it." And a number of those who didn't invest said, there's a big lobby and there's lots of money at stake, and it feels an awful lot like it gets around the taxi cab concessions, and so we're not, and same thing with lending and all sorts of things. So I think there are lots of instances in which one may make bets that push up against laws and regulations. I think that's good for everybody. But the question is sort of who's out there as the active enforcer, because what you learn as you well know as the founder of a startup is that any lawsuit is a loss. It doesn't matter if you're right, and it doesn't matter if you're ultimately victorious. When you're a startup and you have limited resources and you have to waste them defending against something stupid, you are wasting time and money, and so when it's obvious to me that someone has a vested interest and intends to enforce it, there better be an awfully big reason to still go after it, and there rarely is.
So Lucas, does this resonate with your experience, or is it kind of just do it, and that's what a limited liability company is for?
Man, I knew I shouldn't have agreed to do this.
Every time I've seen Lucas, he expresses regret in our meeting.
No, that hasn't been our experience. So we've done several rounds of financing from Sand Hill Road, and there's always questions about regulation because our company does some things where the regulation is actually really unclear. And actually, what we wish the East Coast would do is just make things clear. Because
just tell you the rules
exactly.
so you can follow it.
Yeah, exactly.
Just what Napster wanted.
And got.
And got, yes. Mark, you had some other thoughts. If you're advising Lucas and he's starting this company, that there's a total gray zone. Now, I don't know, are there established interests that Crowdflower is somehow taking on? Maybe that's the difference where, as long as it's not making anybody mad, the fact that it's vague is okay?
Well, we're certainly making people mad. I mean, I think it's hard to make a business without making people mad because, we take business from entrenched BPOs and staffing companies.
Business process outsourcers?
Business process outsourcers, yes. Mm-hmm. And so they certainly have an interest in regulating us away.
Uh-huh. Well, in some it can't be all that long before somebody decides they want to unionize Mechanical Turk employees, right?
Uh-huh. This is Mark Lemley, Stanford law professor extraordinaire. So then what?
Well, a fair question. I mean,
AOL has been facing a lawsuit for like the past 15 years over their volunteers in 1996 who toiled away in the AOL forums as helpers for free. And like they're still talking about collective bargaining.
Right. Yeah, I mean, to me, whether it's employment law or intellectual property law or cabbie regulation in New York City, right? I mean, the lesson, I think, is that if you're trying to do something that's disruptive, where you don't want to actually be in an existing paradigm, but you want to disrupt that paradigm, your only hope is grow fast enough that you become a significant enough player before they realize you're out there and start trying to squash you. And the problem with the music industry, if you're in the digital music business, right, is having missed a few, they're really quite active at the RIAA at catching these things earlier and earlier. And the MPAA's learned its lesson. And so if you're in a digital video startup, right, it's hard to get large enough these days that you seem unstoppable, right? TiVo today, I think, would never have been created.
So let me ask Brewster Kahle, among many hats, founder of the Internet Archive, for which I think there are many people who are like, well, I guess someone had to found it. Yeah. Brewster, you're a great example of somebody that's just like, you know, somebody should be saving this shit. And why not me? Get some servers, start crawling, away we go. And you were able to fund it through your own, initially through Alexa and your own .com venture. To what extent did you have to worry about the white paper problem, or because you weren't having to shop to VCs, and maybe because you were a .org, you also haven't had to follow Mark's advice of just outgrow everyone?
It was a long-term strategy of how do you go and, well, first build up this web thing, get web publishing going well enough that we could build the library, and then what should the library look like? And I stepped off the .com world into the nonprofit world and started telling everybody about everything we were going to do. This is all, you know, this is exactly the advice you don't get from VCs. The idea is to just say, this is what it is we're going to do, this is why we're going to do it, getting feedback from people, and sort of walking slowly and carefully and having a lot of lawyer friends. And this worked for going through with collecting the World Wide Web, then making the Wayback Machine and offering copies of everybody else's website for free, which a lot of lawyers just shook their head. And said, look, it's a library. And they said, oh yeah. And, but it's worked well. Now there's issues around the books, which is thorny. And the next one, I think, coming up is television. And how do you go and make it so that snippets of television can be repurposed out there? And so I'd say using the nonprofit angle, having a small enough board, having people that aren't thinking they're going to make millions off of you, helps in many ways. It doesn't piss off your investors. It also doesn't piss off other people. We found that one of the things we've learned out of this is people don't like feeling like they've been taken advantage of. If they feel like they're being taken advantage of, they'll kill you. And the law is one of the ways, but they'll do something to really mess you up. Whether it's a denial of service attack or the funny things Scientologists do. I don't know. There are all sorts of extra legal things that one can do.
Have you angered the Scientologists in the past?
Before just now?
Oh yeah.
And what did you do when you made the Scientologists angry? What happened next?
This was our first case of when somebody wanted to take things off of the Wayback Machine, but it wasn't their site. We were basically fairly responsive to sort of take things down off the Wayback Machine. If we had archived your website and it was, you and you were on a different, had a different partner, sort of acting stupid in college, whatever, we'd take it down. And Scientology guys said, take this down off of Zeno.net. And we're really completely unprepared for that, so we did take it down. Pissed off a bunch of my friends in Amsterdam, and it had a nice characteristic. It allowed us to have a meeting with the top lawyers of all the search engines and the libraries and the archivists to come up with a policy for how do you take things out of digital archives with one of the least sympathetic clients. Right? There isn't a large bunch of people saying, yeah, the Scientologists should get whatever they want. That's something I learned from EFF is pick your clients well.
Sort of the opposite of the Nazis in Skokie.
Yes.
It's Scientologists in a library.
So I'd say nonprofits are a new spin that adds to this ecology of just between for-profits and the code guys in DC.
And so do you have any particular advice? We saw Mirror as You Link as one of the projects. That's going to be a tool that lets people, as they link, cache, take copies, and make mirrors. What advice would you give them then?
Oh, go for it. The first test is does it smell good, right? Does it look like what you're doing would make it such that the other person would be upset? And from my point of view, and that's a very different thing than call up all your lawyer friends. Because if you get a bunch of lawyers in a room, you're going to get 7 or 8 or 10 or 15 different opinions out of 5 guys. And they'll roll out the list of risks and dragging out law. It's like, huh? And so first is do things that smell good. Another is make sure that at the end of the day, there are many winners. I think as the Mozilla team pointed out, go and make it so there's no central points of control. So at the end of the day, you don't feel like you're swiping something and making it so somebody doesn't win.
So there's one more question maybe along these lines about poking giants and such. And I know we have, I think, 3 lawyers on this panel, not counting the moderator. Guess the lawyer is the game show we're about to play. Alex, you're the most outed of them as general counsel to a company. But let me ask you, not in your capacity with Twitter or even your former capacity with Google, but one of our students had a kind of epiphany during this exercise in which he felt strongly about SOPA, and he thought that there was probably an issue having to do with who was getting what campaign donations, and there ought to be a way to have people condition their donations on a no vote on SOPA. And the wonderful thing is between the idea and the execution lies no abyss whatsoever, it seems. So like just, a night fueled by Dr. Pepper and worse, he seems to have produced a site where there's a donate link, you can transfer money to him. It's kind of like Kickstarter. You can think about what your condition is, if this, then that. If Senator Wyden does such and such on SOPA, then he gets my money. And by the way, you can register for the site through Facebook, so it's Facebook Connect, and that means I get all your private details. It's basically, it touches every single hot button I can think of, and as best I can tell, I don't know if I should say what Pam Carlin, it's at least 3 felonies, I think, having to do with bribery, attempted bribery, et cetera, et cetera.
Clearly.
Using Facebook.
What's that?
Using Facebook, that's the 3rd felony.
Using Facebook.
I joke because I love.
So for all of these things, I don't know, do you take it as a point of pride that any well-intentioned nerd can build something so completely out of sync with the East Coast so quickly, or is it something to worry about?
Yeah, that's the fun, right? Like and we should not be putting down the East Coast nerds. There are plenty of West Coast coders who happen to live on the East Coast.
Yes.
But yeah, that's the greatest thing about what I do every day is, I get to wake up and people have all sorts of crazy ideas. I can't tell you how many times Napster's been invented and reinvented and reinvented. But yeah, you get to find somebody who is creative and brilliant. So you have this totally heavy mantle on you as a general counsel, because it's like, let's just ask Alex. And Go Ask Alex is the new movie. That's a very dated reference, but it's West Coast in a way. And it rests on your shoulders to be like, go for it or don't go for it. How do you decide? Do you get the white paper written up? What do you do? Yeah, like I say, I think that's the fun. Like that's to me one of the best things about my job. And the thing that I think a lot of lawyers don't think about is that at the end of the day, hopefully you're a lawyer with a client or you're a lawyer at a company. So your job is not to say exactly like, here are all the problems. Your job is to try to figure out whether there's any way to do it in a way that would give you less problems. And then hopefully you have good business people who can figure out the pros and cons of actually taking the risk and doing the thing. And yeah, there are lots of things that I as a general counsel can't or won't say yes to. I mean, nobody's killing small babies. And there are plenty of things that as a business person you'd never say yes to. But then there's a wide open space of all of these things that you could say yes to, or they could be made better, or they could get out there in a way that, as Brewster, who's so amazing with narrative, that could be out there framed in a way that would be better. And all of that is, that's the fun, right? Having creative engineers and helping them do things.
Uh-huh. And among our privacy groups was one group that was looking for changes in privacy policies. I know there's like a sort of very prosaic problem with that, one that Brewster and the Internet Archive and others encounter all the time. It's hard to scrape stuff, especially as it gets more and more interactive. and even just figuring out a privacy policy if you're going to a website and grabbing it is hard. If they were to come to you and say, hey, Twitter, would you just mind giving us a clean copy of your privacy policy every single time you change it? No brainer, or you'd have to consult with the board?
Well, we probably wouldn't have to consult with the board. I mean, that particular one was one that I've been looking for somebody to undertake. We actually publish the old privacy policies. One of the problems is that diffs just look crappy. Sites change without the actual content changing. It's really hard to figure that out.
Yeah.
So you want a clean diff, and me as a general counsel, I want that too. I mean, I don't live at a company that can do anything unnoticed. And so, of course, everyone's going to know what goes on at Twitter, and we want to make it easier for them to have the facts, because we're not ashamed of the things we do. We actually think they're the right things to do, right?
Esther Wojcicki, educator, famed journalism teacher at Palo Alto High School. Any alums of Esther's here? No, I'm really surprised.
Yeah, I'm surprised too.
Well, it's probably too late to take a class from her at Palo Alto High School. But famed journalism teacher there, and has served as chair of the board of Creative Commons, an example of an idea that kind of emerged. Few people, Larry Lessig, Hal Abelson, some others, Mike Carroll, who were like, there ought to be, I think it was first, a digital library that people can submit stuff to. And then in part because of the white paper problem, they were like, no, there ought to just be labels that people can put on their stuff. The
right.
web will be the library, and then it gets crawled. For an organization like that doesn't measure its success in money or in money raised, how do you figure out when Creative Commons is succeeding and when it isn't? I mean, is it time to just declare victory and call it a day? Or how do you steer it?
Well, that's a good question, and the board is trying to wrestle with that. So one of the ways that we determine whether or not we're successful is adoption. How many licenses have been adopted by Creative Commons? Or by people, Creative Commons licenses have been adopted. And we have about 500 million at the moment. Sounds like a lot.
That can include every Flickr picture. Yes. So it's kind of like under the McDonald's sign, billions and billions served, sort of thing.
Yes, it's similar. We probably should have a sign up there on the
Yeah.
the
Give it
number
back to you.
of
Let's
it
give it
should
back to you.
just click every time a new license comes around. That's actually a very good idea.
Yes.
So that's one thing. Another thing that we're trying to do that's really important is to get the word out to students about what is Creative Commons, and so that they understand that there are a lot of things on the web that are licensed with Creative Commons licenses, and that they don't have to resort to piracy. They can actually get something that they want by knowing that it exists, and looking in the Creative Commons pot, so to speak. And a lot of students around the country don't even know what Creative Commons is. So one of my goals, and one of the goals of the organization, is to spread this in high schools, and that's one of the things that I'm doing. High schools, actually, they start in middle school. They start snitching in middle school on the web. They think if it's up there, it's free. So all of you that are creating all this wonderful stuff, they're just helping themselves. And so
So they started snitching or filching?
Both.
Somebody filches and then someone snitches.
That's right.
Yeah.
No, it's true. So my students at Palo Alto High School, they know what Creative Commons is, and they are really very careful about selecting images that they use and text that they use on their blogs and in their publications. But they've been informed. I've taught them about that, and all the other teachers in the program have too. And it's not like something I have to enforce. It's interesting. They actually self-enforce. If they know about it, they'll do it themselves. I don't have to constantly tell them. They just didn't before coming into my class, they had no idea it even existed.
Yeah. That's a great example then of a recent internet-oriented development finding its way into the classroom. I'm curious, especially because we had one group focus on the future of education, and in particular in university-delivered courses and forging communities around it.
Right.
From the front lines, to what extent does your classroom operate differently in 2012 than it did, say, in 1999?
So everything is now on the web. So the Palo Alto High School journalism program produces a newspaper, 3 magazines, 2 television broadcasts, and a website. So, and everything is on the web. Everything is Creative Commons licensed. 10 years ago, or 12 years ago, that didn't exist. So back in those days, we actually used to do things like, well, we would cut things out, paste them up on a paste board. I don't know if anybody remembers that. And then we would
There's
run...
actually several exhibits outside that have exactly that quality.
Run them down to the printer, you know, at midnight, past the deadline. Now all we do is go online, FTP, send it over the internet, and it's there. And so that's a pretty big difference. Also, we don't have to run around searching for images and other things. We can just get them online. Creative Commons, Flickr, Picasa.
And do these kids care about their privacy? I mean, there's so many different ways to answer that question. One would be kind of the way that many of the groups today answered it, having to do with tracking and stuff as they surf. Another would be the extent to which they happily post anything, including extremely embarrassing things on Facebook, say, and worry not about who might see it someday.
Well, those of you that know Palo Alto High School know that most of those kids are trying to get into Stanford or Harvard, right? They're all trying to get into the top schools. So about the 10th grade, they get worried about their digital footprint. But prior to that, they really don't know what a digital footprint
erase all
is.
criticism against Dungeons and Dragons.
Right. And so I encourage them to forget about putting those wild party pictures up on Facebook. Some of them take my advice, but unfortunately some of them actually have written articles for some of our publications that they are later embarrassed by. So it's at least 2 or 3 times a year I get an email from a student who might have graduated 10 years ago and who wrote some column that he thought was hysterically funny. You know, humor is one of those things that creates a lot of problems for them. And they wrote the column, either the subject of the column or they wrote the column. And it comes up first on the Google search. And they're trying to get a job. And so they can't do it. Do you
take it down?
Well, they beg, and I have a very soft heart. And so I shouldn't do this, but
Jonathan, I'm an investor in Reputation.com. Reputation.com for...
So yes, I do take it down.
You should invest in Singly.
Yes, but they are very concerned
You should
now.
just offer them psseudonyms, nom de plumes, to begin with.
I should, but
I have that idea too, it's free.
I don't let them do that. No. But they are concerned with their privacy. The older they are, the more concerned they are with their privacy. Yes.
Now I was going to say, that naturally brings it over to John Battelle.
Because I'm terribly concerned about my privacy.
Say it like
What am I doing?
mean it.
What am I here for God's sake? I should be alone in a room.
So talk to us, John, both about the extent to which, I mean, the presentations among the student groups were pretty privacy heavy, and you're one of the people at Mission Control that may have an opportunity to see, I don't know, how many websites for dog food I visited.
Well, I imagine if anyone went through a number of the sites that are part of the network that we have, which is over 190 million uniques in the world, there would be a ton of red dots after going through our sites because we practice the cookie.
You say you practice the
We
cookie.
practice the cookie.
Yes.
We track the cookie, we look at the cookie, we match the cookie, and that is something that we do.
It's terrible. It's such a
It
nice
turns out
and
I'm also on the advisory board of a company named Singly, and I think we're very close as a culture to flipping the paradigm here from one of not understanding and not knowing and how our data is being used to understanding, instrumenting, and controlling it, and then bartering it back.
Yeah.
And when that happens, very good things are going to happen, not just for all of us, but I think for the entire economy.
So paint us a picture. Can you give us an example of what that might look like?
Well, I think that most of us are not used to the idea of instrumenting our digital identity. It's something that we, maybe we set up a Facebook profile, and this is correlative to age. I would argue. Now, my daughter, who's 13, thanks to a conference I ran, met Mark Zuckerberg and brought him over to me and said, "You tell him." And Mark said, "Yes, she can get a Facebook page when she turns 13." And
like that scene out of Annie Hall.
and I said, "I knew that, Mark, but I wanted you to fucking lie," And so my daughter spends as much time manicuring that page as she does getting dressed, literally. And I don't know if that will pass. I imagine it might die down at some point. But the idea of how much time all of us spend thinking about our image physically in the world it's significant. It's from, the sort of Einstein, I have the same 15 suits, which is only 5 minutes, just getting dressed, to a lot of people who think a lot about how they get dressed, maybe multiple times a day. And I've argued in some of my writings that our digital plumage is something that we are going to spend a lot of time on. Now, if you inform that closet of clothes, so to speak, with a storehouse of data, and you decide how you're going to describe yourself and instrument yourself digitally, and then that becomes something, a token that you can barter with an ecosystem, then all of a sudden you are in control. And I think that's part of the presentations that we saw today with some of that thinking. There are people who are working on this problem. It's a non-trivial problem of distributed data and lockers and storage and negotiations and so on. But I do believe that we are inevitably going that way. And when we do, we will have a lot of sort of the towers of sort of false East Coast code-driven economies will crumble, and you will see far more sort of peer-to-peer economies rise up.
False East Coast code economies sounds like a euphemism for something.
The MPAA.
Okay, just as long as we're being clear.
As one example.
And it also calls to mind Nick
Or
Bilton's...
EPO, I suppose, in your case, right? I mean, there's just a lot of economies that are basically driven by, it's always been done this way because it was hard to do it any other way, right? And I think that if there's any core thing that really drives the internet, it's that no, it doesn't necessarily mean that's not hard anymore.
Yeah.
So therefore, let's renegotiate some of these presumptions and how we connect to each other.
Yeah. It does call to mind a little bit Nick Bilton's opening talk and his love of multitasking, that every event and interaction becomes experienced both for its own sake and how it will be fit into one's timeline. Like, that's a great sunset. Better capture it now and think of just the right caption to put through all social media.
Yeah, I'm a little afraid of as I say, don't plant your taproot too deeply in the soils of a platform that you do not control.
Well, and that I think actually is an interesting way to sort of transition back to East Coast code versus West Coast code, right? I mean, look, I worry about the government, right? Because governments regulate, it's what they do. And so asking the government to say, oh, internet, big important thing, now a big part of our economy, let's leave it alone. That goes against government, it just goes against the nature of government. But I also worry increasingly about what John's saying, right? And you've written about this. If we are moving from a world in which the internet really is an open space in which anybody can do anything they want, to a world in which you've got 2 or 3 platforms and you can do anything that the platform will allow you to do, which is subject to change in at the whim of the platform or the 55-page privacy policy, then we're not really in the world of the internet anymore,
Would
right?
you think of Twitter as an example of such a platform?
Well, I mean, not really, right? That is, it's heavily constrained in one respect, right? You want to write more than 140 characters, good luck to you. But I don't know that it's heavily constrained in another respect. But I would think of Apple or Facebook as such
Apple
a
or
platform.
Facebook on the panel.
Yeah,
I was
well,
trying to put
can't help
Alex
you
in a
there.
comfortable position.
Twitter's
But Alex,
a free radical.
do you, I guess you're the wrong person to ask if you worry about Twitter becoming too powerful, but isn't there some way in which, I mean, I guess you've recently tangled with Google over your perception of claimed monopoly behaviors and using the search engine to leverage into other areas. Maybe I should let you describe that as well. It'd be great to hear you actually talk a little bit about that. And then, how is Twitter possibly in the same boat to the extent that, I don't know what the right market is, but if there's a market for microblogging, Twitter seems to have it cornered.
Yeah, I think
I guess I would go back to your first thing. You said, sir, I'm the wrong person to worry about if Twitter gets too big. And I think all of us who are involved in things that aren't us, that aren't our person, we all think about maybe not quite that worry, but what is this thing we're creating, and what are the rules and code by which it should exist? And Twitter certainly in that space now. We just rethought our core values and started thinking about them in an even more concrete way. Things like respect and defend the user's voice, which is important to us. But I think that's the same. The same is true was true at Google and is true at Google. They have a view of who they are as a company and what the thing they're trying to create. The same is true at the Internet Archive. Same is true for everybody, as I said. And I do think that's a real thing to think about. As small as you are before the day that you become big, and to try to figure out, well, what are the things that are important? What is this thing that we're all doing together?
I'm just curious, David, when you hear pitches from people, how often does it come up? Well, what are your core values? I know that would make you a lot of money, but do you really want to do that? How often does that come up?
If you're smart, you spend enough time with the company to get a sense of their core values. And core values are very broad, right? I mean, to some companies, it's about how they treat employees and how they build a business. In some companies, it's, what are the methods by which they extract more value for themselves or whatever else. And so the answer is, it's very rarely in that first 12, slides in the pitch deck. But if you're investing in a company and you don't have a very clear view of how what they're trying to build, then you haven't spent enough time.
But if they have something they could build that really would hit the mother load, but seems a little sketchy, pass or take from a venture capitalist perspective?
I guess it depends on the VC. I mean, pass. I'm in the pass.
You would
world.
pass.
He would
Yeah,
pass.
I would pass.
I know some VCs who wouldn't.
Yeah.
And
But can I go back to
sure.
to this earlier question, because I do think it's an interesting one, which is, you have a Twitter, you have a Facebook. These are platform businesses, right? The big win is that you create this platform and others build on top of it. And therefore, they're making certain bets, Mechanical Turk or whatever. You're building a business. You're making a set of business decisions based on the predictability of these platforms upon which you invest time and money, et cetera.
Yes.
There will come a time if, a Facebook, which is about to touch 1 billion people, is touching 3 billion people, or Twitter is about to touch 500 million people, is touching 1 billion people, where governments and law will have to deal with this question of, hey, we said we could be unpredictable, so we just fucked you, sorry. Or, no, guess what? We have certain expectations when building atop these platforms, and you can't simply change them because you said you could change them. And it'll be a very interesting moment in time. It'll be an interesting question for the antitrust laws. It'll be an interesting question for...
We're in that moment right now.
I was going to say, I think that moment is 2012.
That moment just happened, I think, with Google Plus integration into search.
Right, exactly. By the way, now we get to favor who we want. We didn't think you were going to do that. Yeah, but we are. And so it'll be I don't have any, this isn't an accusation or anything. I just think that this is an interesting moment in time as these platforms become wildly powerful and have huge influences on how companies and people behave on the internet, et cetera.
And it's an interesting question then whether what you might call API neutrality, is that a West Coast concept or an East Coast concept? Is it like, no, you want to make a platform so everybody can build on it, that's good for coders on the West? Or is it might be good for your business model to attract a lot of people in and then suddenly close the door, start charging when you didn't before, who knows what, and then the East might regulate in a way that wouldn't have maybe everybody squealing.
This is why network neutrality is such a hard problem, right? It's because it's an effort to regulate, to use East Coast code to build a West Coast value that is currently under threat into the network, right? And that's a great goal, and I'm in favor of that goal, but I'm also quite nervous about the mechanism we're going to use to get there, right? And so, the idea that we're actually going to get guaranteed openness because the government comes in and says, here are the rules that we will establish to guarantee openness, I don't see lasting very long. In some sense, we've kind of lived in a not too bad world with the omnipresent threat of regulation around network neutrality just about to happen but never actually happening, constraining parties' behavior but never actually having the problems of creating rules that we all have to live with in new generations.
Policy, though.
You can't, you can only do it once, right? Once you say it, the game's up. But I think that's actually going to be a problem we're going to see in the antitrust laws as well, right? Is it okay for a company to decide, we're going to include some information and not others. We're going to preference some information and not others. On the flip side, right, is it okay for a Twitter or a Facebook to say, we're not going to let you in to search deep if you're Google, right? We're not going to let you index our stuff. These are problems, I think, that you can think about as regulatory problems, but I think we're worse off, in a sense, whatever the regulatory outcome is once we start regulating.
I'd like to turn to some questions either from the Twitter stream or directly from people if we have the audio capability to do it. But before that, I just wanted to give AMAC an opportunity to answer the question of whether it's okay for Twitter to hypothetically tell Google or somebody else you can't deep scrape or deep link tweets.
We actually do let them search. They hit us all the time, and they're indexing, I think, 3 billion Twitter pages. So it's not an issue in that scuffle. The one thing I would, so the thing I would maybe add to that is I do think, this was, so I had a tweet that saw a lot of people last week because I said that it was a bad day for the internet, that Google was preferring some of its own stuff over some of its others. And my original complaint really had nothing to do with monopoly or any of the legal stuff. It was just that I was part of that thing, and that I thought was wonderful, and that I still think is wonderful, Google. And we were all on this shared mission, and it had these principles that were bedrock. And among those were that the user was who you should be trying to serve, and that you should be looking for relevance, right? And so the thing that depressed me was just that. It didn't even have, even without my general counsel hat on, right? It was just, shoot, there was this great thing that we were all building together that I'm no longer a part of, but it seems like something changed. And I think that goes to Mark and probably David's point too, that there's something in there about the change that is a big deal in all of these conversations. And so, what do you do and how do you change over time is big.
I'm going to put it over to Elizabeth to see what we have, and I think we're going to go for about another 10 minutes and then declare victory. Elizabeth?
All right, first of all, everyone, please tweet your questions with the hashtag BetterInternet. I'm actually going to start briefly with one. So tomorrow is quite possibly the biggest protest in internet history. Several folks here on the panel are participating. For example, the homepage now of google.com now is blacked out, the logo, and there's a call to action for people to contact Congress. Is this a watershed moment for the integration of East Coast Code and West Coast Code?
I don't know about integration. It's certainly a watershed moment. It's after midnight on the East Coast. I kind of expected the lights to go out here, but
no. Instead, productivity is all tomorrow. Are you kidding me?
But look, so
no,
I mean,
Reddit means more work.
I've been fighting this PIPA-SOPA fight probably since before anybody else. This was something that passed the Senate Judiciary Committee unanimously less than 2 weeks after it was introduced because everyone thought it was uncontroversial. And now it's exploded, to such an extent that, look, by a couple of orders of magnitude, more people have expressed their views to Congress about this than about all intellectual property issues in the 220-year history of the Congress combined.
Yes.
Right?
Good.
It's really quite astonishing, sort of as a reminder both of what the internet can do in mobilizing people and outpouring even on a sort of really technical issue like this.
There was a time when Wikipedia went dark over the Patent Act of 1832.
Yes, no doubt, no doubt. about. But I think it's an interesting, you asked at the very beginning about sort of surprises from East Coast code and West Coast code. I think this has got one for each, right? That is, Congress thought it was engaged in normal congressional behavior. There's piracy out there, it's bad. We haven't been able to stop it with existing laws, so we must need some new laws. And Hollywood came and said, this is what we need, and I think everybody in Congress really 9 months ago thought that was an uncontroversial proposition. And the West Coast really sort of surprised them, in part because the West Coast was surprised. They woke up and said, hey, wait a minute, right? You're talking about breaking the fundamental characteristics that make the internet, and that's crazy. And I think it's people with entirely different mindsets about both what's important, but also kind of how one goes about doing it. Right? That is the solution to a problem to outlaw it, right? Or is the solution to a problem to sort of work around it?
Yeah.
I can tell you the solution to a problem is not to outlaw it, because they're going to get around it no matter what. I deal with kids do it all the time.
You finally relented on the chewing gum rule. It's just not.
Anytime.
I find the SOPA protests that are going to happen tomorrow just actually one of the more inspired thing that I've seen since Occupy Wall Street. I think it's completely great. And Internet Archive is going to take down its website for 12 hours.
Is it the homepage or the entire site?
The homepage and every page on it.
There'll be no Wayback Machine tomorrow.
No entrance to the Wayback Machine.
That's the very subtle distinction.
That's great.
If you embed a part of your website based on the Wayback, if you never knew you were using the Wayback Machine, it will still be there.
Deep links will work.
Deep links will work.
Yes.
And so but this was a difficult thing to come to.
Yes.
Because to go and demonstrate to Washington that government does matter, they shouldn't just sell off the internet for what? For a few campaign contributions by a few small cartels, doesn't make any sense. And it has much broader impact than they thought. But the only way that we could think of to deal with this was to show the fragility of the web.
Yes.
By basically taking the trust that people have that they can still use Wikipedia as dependably as the Encyclopedia Britannica when we were growing up, some of us growing up.
I couldn't tell if he was telling people they were immature or not.
But it will go away. Yes. And showing the fragility is showing, in some sense, that you can't quite trust this thing, whether it's the websites or the government.
Yes. It might be worth asking just sort of both Lucas and John from your corners of the web if how much SOPA has broken through as an issue, as not business as usual. And if so, how many times do we get to fire that emergency flare?
I think that's the one question I have. Brad Templeton, DFF, and I were talking about this before. You don't want to cry wolf every single time you get pissed off at stupid laws, and I get the sense this isn't the last one that we're going to have to deal with. And this is stupid. I mean, just let me go on the record.
So what do you do if there's a pack of wolves?
Well, but I'm not saying it's not a good idea to do this, because I think that at some point it needs to get, this one is bad enough to get rolling. And I think your point is well taken about showing the fragility of this thing that we've built sort of through consensus, mostly.
Well, there's another possible effect, though, right, which is you send a message to Congress that's more enduring than this particular bill is a bad bill, right? It's either a message that there are a bunch of people who actually care about the internet and that you don't do something about it.
That,
right?
to me, is the key.
Yeah.
Is can we turn this into more of a lasting commitment on all of our parts?
Basically, can you create a constituency?
Well, I mean, if you look at my company, I mean, we've been around for 5 or 6 years. We have 250 people, and we're profitable, and we're thinking about, do we have a voice beyond what our vision is, which is to serve independent publishers? Well, you know what? Yeah, we actually should, and I'm going to go to Washington now, and I'm going to start to get to know people, and I'm talking to AMAC, and I'm meeting, the people I should meet. I just frankly wouldn't have really made that part of my work prior to this. So, and I think everybody needs to start thinking that way, and I think you have a whole crop of entrepreneurs who right now are, just hoping they get invited to one of the 722 conferences about, startups that are happening in this valley. and maybe they'll start to think about these issues too, you know, and I think that's a good thing. And as someone wrote a very popular article 2 weeks ago saying, hey, Congress, it's not cool anymore to not understand the internet. It's very clear that Congress doesn't understand the internet when they wrote SOPA because they didn't write it. It was written by the MPAA, right? Yes. And so, but the retort to that is, hey, Silicon Valley, it's not cool to understand Congress, right? And I think that we can learn that.
Lucas, I just want to give you a chance. How much has SOPA hit your radar, if at all?
So SOPA hasn't affected, I mean, we've been sued for IP issues, but SOPA hasn't affected us that much. I think, you know, I've sort of had a similar experience. I mean, maybe it's just starting as we get to like 70 or 80 people, and you know, I start to worry about Washington policy. It's kind of interesting. And the thing that worries me is that I think that as companies get bigger, like Google and Facebook, they really have a voice, and it's like they can shut down their site and people can really care. But it worries me that the smaller companies have like absolutely no voice, right? And I think that people don't see, I think the government probably doesn't see the bad effects that some of their laws have on really small business. So it's really hard to comply with every regulation. I think we've all had that experience, and there's no one really advocating well for small companies. Yeah. Although there are a million conferences they can go to, I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, it's very direct for us. SOPA would make it illegal for us to provide advertising services to, I mean, we provide advertising services to 100 or 160,000 sites. And so now I have to hire 200 more people just to see if those sites are infringing so I can notify and return notify them.
You could use
That's
Crowdflower.
insane. I could use Crowdflower.
We have a business deal right here. Just a witness to it. Give him a discount, right? The first puff is free. Elizabeth, maybe share like 3 things from the Twitter stream, and people can then graze on what they like.
Sure. Actually, we have a rather overarching question. So at Mishmash wants to know, so we have lots of folks here in the audience, people that are really passionate about technology. She wants to know what the people in the audience can do about breaking open East Coast code. We have people that are tech savvy, that know about these issues. How can they play a part?
Do the right thing. Every step of the way, do the right thing, walk through the doors, change how things work, be open about your approaches, and change this puppy. I mean, we don't want to live with the constraints that we grew up with. That world sucked. I mean, so let's build that new world. It may take a little while. Do the right things. If you get shot up, there are a bunch of lawyers that'll help you.
Well, that and maybe prompts a question a little bit about techno-utopianism, which is, to what extent do you think our experience on the net and the web and in social media over the past 10 years actually represents some new emergent form of people getting together, solving differences, creating a polity as compared to the forms that have served us for 10 years?
Hogwash and dangerous. Okay, so we're a library. We call ourselves that's a no. Okay. We call ourselves a library very much on purpose. It's the Internet Archive. It's completely weird to have something so old and so new. But by being a library, and we've got anointed by being a library by the California State Librarian, we bring with us hundreds of years of law that help protect us. And also a civic responsibility. And eventually funding, we hope, but that never seemed to happen. But the idea of using, it's not all made up afresh. Because when we've seen people make things up afresh, they come up with things like the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which is awful. So I think if we were to be a little bit bringing some of the old with the new, and bringing some of the traditions with us, we have more legs to stand on. For instance, anonymous writing. There's a long tradition in this country to allow people to anonymously write. Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense. He was anonymous at the time. It was very important towards the revolution.
He was America's first troll.
But it may be,
It's America's first blogger.
we may be close to losing anonymous writing. So I think by using the old in the new, we can actually keep, selectively, some of the pieces that we want to have move forward.
Alex, did you have a thought on this front?
I mean, I think there are lots of great organizations. Code for America is a great organization, EFF, ACLU, lots and lots of places you can go to do great things that only you and the audience are capable of doing. But what I would say is there's some more basic things. Like, it's still not uncool for an engineer not to vote. Like, really straightforward stuff that we can change and actually get that to be uncool and make it so that you have parties with engineers that they talk about the election and stuff like that, right? There are ways we can make it more likely that not only will be able to cause a huge ruckus, which we're doing a great job of tomorrow,
yes.
But we'll actually be able to change the way government thinks about us.
You still accept the basic categories of, there's a .gov, it's government. There's a .com, it's the business sector. And there's a .org, it's the nonprofits. There's .edu, it's education. Or are there these hybrids or other forms that don't fit? I mean, Mozilla might be a good example.
Mozilla, amazing example. Both the nonprofit, for-profit, they're working with a relationship that does have profitable, but also you're working to improve society. It's like awesome. But you look at like the Code for America is another great one. Is that a government organization? Is it a non-government organization? It's clearly a non-government organization, but they're kind of doing a whole bunch of stuff that's great for government.
Yeah.
But stuff that might not be able to be done, right?
Yeah, what about Kickstarter? I mean, just today I gave money to a documentary on an issue that matters, and it wasn't about, and yeah, Kickstarter's a business, they're going to make some money, and the documentarians are artists, but they're really about
peer-to-peer lending, for example.
Yeah, I think there are a ton of these things, whether it's a Kiva or whether it's for profit or whatever. I mean, I think there are lots of opportunities for people to say, hey, here's technology that allows a larger engagement, that removes barriers. And I think, truthfully, I think that social media is an astonishing microphone for better or worse, for everyone, right? Yeah. So it's not just, we would love to say, oh yeah, it's great because we can beat SOPA and PIPA and, the liberals can prevail and blah, blah, blah. And yet, the Tea Party gets to use it too and and so, but I think that's powerful engagement and so the fact that there is so many, more ways to engage and to magnify your voice has to have an impact in the long run.
One last question from Twitter. So RF Barry points out that entrepreneurship moves so much faster than digital law, and we happen to have a good amount of both entrepreneurs and lawyers on the panel. How do we address this moving forward?
We celebrate that fact. Well, seriously, right? So we've tried on a number of occasions, right? Some very forward-thinking people, said, okay, well, let's figure out the legal issues that are going to come up with new technologies, and we'll write laws around them. So in the 1990s, lots of states passed laws regulating digital signature certification authorities because everybody understood that no one was going to be willing to transfer money over the internet unless they had a public key encryption system and unless they had a certification authority that would make sure that the public key system was still good. And how would you know that the certification authority was in fact valid? So we had to regulate all of that. And then sort of surprise of surprises, people just started sending their credit card numbers and then developing PayPal and bypassing the entire system altogether. So if you regulate too early, right, you end up writing a regulation which maybe is just useless, like the digital signature rule, or maybe is worse than useless, like the decision in 1998 in the Digital Millennium Copyright Act to categorize internet intermediaries into 4 categories, one of which did not include peer-to-peer networking because that was still 2 months away. 2 months after the bill was passed, right, we develop a new technology that doesn't fit in one of those categories, and we then try to apply the legal rules that we've written with something in mind. So I think there's not necessarily a bad thing that we wait and don't have law, and in some sense let it develop organically through the courts rather than legislating it early on.
Can you think of an example where it was too late?
Oh, well, I mean, look, yeah, right? I mean, although too late for what, right? every time in the last 120 years, there's been a new media technology, the content industry that owned the old media technology has announced that the sky was falling, and if they didn't get regulation, they were all going to die, right? So the phonograph was going to destroy the sheet music industry.
You're not agreeing with any of these two.
No, exactly, right.
But
so
is
is
there
that
too late you would agree with? In which case, the law could just wait indefinitely.
Mark, how about Microsoft?
Yeah, so Microsoft is an interesting question, right? So I mean, the Antitrust Division brought an antitrust case against Microsoft, and it won. In one sense, the antitrust consent, the decree didn't end up changing anything. Although in another sense, the sort of bringing of the lawsuit, I actually think changed the dynamics a little bit. But maybe the answer is it didn't matter, right? That is, it would have mattered in 1995 because Netscape would still have had a strong internet browser presence. But by 1999, the world was moving on anyway.
Which had a bigger impact? The consent decree and the lawsuit, or Google kicking their ass and Facebook kicking their ass? Like that, it's very clear which had a bigger impact on how they had to perceive business and how they had to, So
that's right, although I also think the fact that they're under antitrust scrutiny changed their business behavior in a way that might have allowed companies like Google and Facebook to exist.
It also emboldened, I would say, some people to get into the business.
Right. And I think we may see that replayed this year. It would not surprise me, right, if Google gets sued by the government in the next 12 months for some form of antitrust violation. And whether or not they do, the fact that they're under scrutiny, I think actually can't help but change their behavior in ways that may open up the playing field for others.
It certainly is funny to think, just in the intervening decade or 2 decades from the original Microsoft suit, how much things have changed in the sense that Microsoft was about a product. Often in the case, the analogy used was somebody that has all the milk starts forcing you to buy orange juice with it. It was extremely wonderfully simplistic metaphor that was possible. That seems awfully hard to map to 2012 when the services we're talking about, we don't know what the market is. It's a market for what? And it's a service and not a product. It's not a one-time sale and you get this, you get that, but rather so many of our things are ongoing relationships. Mitchell, you're going to get the last word, but let's wait for a microphone for you. And then...
I don't know if it's worth being the last word, but if we're talking about antitrust, and Microsoft, and it didn't matter, I think I have to pretty fundamentally disagree. Like Mozilla's a nonprofit, it needs to be a nonprofit, but it never would have gotten off the ground and never would have succeeded if it were not a nonprofit because Microsoft and its setting made the market impossible. No one would have funded an alternative browser in 1999 or 2000. And so we exist as a nonprofit and I like it and we do a lot of great things, but that is a market failure.
Yeah, I just recently have been dwelling on how quaint it seems in retrospect that the behaviors within the Microsoft case that caused so much trouble had to do with Microsoft telling original equipment manufacturers like HP what they could and couldn't bundle along with the computers when you took it out of the box because users were so docile that whatever icon confronted them when they turned on the computer for the first time is what they would basically click on for the
Wait a minute, have you ever taken an iPhone out of a box?
Yeah, right.
We're doing it all over again, guys.
We're doing it all over
again. We're doing it all over
the
again.
search engine on Firefox? Or,
I think we're just, we have a lot to learn from.
Yeah, and we could lose this at the plumbing layer.
Yes.
We broke up the phone companies.
Yeah, the ability to route around layer.
And it's going away.
Yes.
And we had a great, we had the internet, we had cell phones, all sorts of great things happen. And there are very few choices now.
Yes.
Net neutrality is having trouble.
Yes.
Whether you agree with, that is the solution, but we're seeing consolidation and monopolization. It may be too late on that layer.
And in some ways, recognizing the power of the default then and now is recognizing how much in our day-to-day lives we have our own things we want to do, we have hashtags to search, we have statuses to update. And, sorry Alex, just giving you red meat now.
Search those hashtags.
Yeah. An angel gets its wings every time you use a hashtag. But
Where's that word tufty when you need him?
But you go about your daily life, and it's hard often to focus on the big picture, and we inevitably turn to proxies for that. We turn to organizations and people that we think maybe are going to be out there fighting the good fight for us on any number of fronts. It's the essence, really, even of politics, until we're awakened every 4 years to cast a vote between, threat and menace. It's just a reminder as we turn back to our students and the groups who presented that to the extent that there are opportunities institutionally and individually to have an idea that's outside our normal, just hands reach away from us, that we might be able to enlist others in, to get mind share for, to persuade them of the merits of, and see if it can take off. So long as that essence is one way or another preserved, we have a chance to make a system that is, in the best of senses, self-renewing. With that, I know we're out of time, so just please join me in thanking our panel for such a terrific